Next on Secrets of War, 1940. Nazi Germany invaded France, inflicting the worst humiliation the French had ever known. Brave individuals risking torture and death took it upon themselves to reclaim the honor of their country and carried on a secret, merciless guerrilla campaign. The unseen face of the French resistance is next on Secrets of War.
As the phony war of 1940 exploded into blitzkrieg, Nazi troops poured into France. The impregnable Maginot Line, the Ardennes, and then Dunkirk quickly fell. At each test, the French military failed. The government was impotent, racked by political crisis. The relentless Nazi drive took thousands of prisoners from towns and villages in its path. The bodies of 100,000 victims littered the earth. In panic, tens of thousands of French clogged the roads heading southward, fleeing the Nazi advance. The Luftwaffe attacked Paris. The government fled west. Barely 1 month after the start of the Blitzkrieg, on June 4th, the Wehrmacht marched into the capital. The Nazis took the jewel of France with the speed of a ruthless thief. The population was stupefied and disorganized.
You have all that trauma going on, so the shock is one which is both instant and devastating. People cannot imagine what has happened to their lives.
At the top of the Eiffel Tower, the Nazis unfurled the swastika. German troops paraded down the Champs-Élysées. But the streets were deserted. Half the Parisian population had fled. In the bright light of midsummer, those who stayed cowered indoors, shrouded by the blackness of defeat. Individual acts of resistance were suicidal. Any overt actions brought immediate execution. The British frantically demanded that their French allies stand fast against Hitler, but to no avail. In Bordeaux, Marshal Philippe Pétain, the aged hero of World War I, became prime minister. Instead of mounting an offensive, he offered surrender.
History will later tell what you have been saved from.
Hitler accepted Pétain's request for an armistice under the most humiliating circumstances possible. The Fuhrer demanded that it be signed in the same railroad car where a crippled Germany had capitulated to France in 1918 at the end of World War I. The denigration was only beginning. The armistice divided France in two. German military authorities governed in an occupied zone in the north. The south, the so-called unoccupied zone, was governed from the spa town of Vichy by the collaborator Marshal Pétain. Across France, Pétain was the respected savior of World War I. Many placed their trust in him, hoping he would play a double game, resisting the occupiers. But Pétain immediately eliminated progressive leaders from local government jobs. The Republican ideas of liberty, fraternity, and equality were replaced by work, family, and fatherland. These values suspiciously resembled the fascist ideology of Nazi Germany. In the occupied North, after the debacle of the first days, there was an air of unreal calm. The population was awed by the occupiers. The troops were on their best behavior.
We were all impressed by their virility, their beauty, and their youth.
Paris had taken on a new face. German soldiers began to frequent bookstores and cafes. At major avenues, signs were posted in German. Yet in the daytime, there was a sense of normalcy. The Nazis wore a velvet glove over their iron fist.
All that was oppressive, but it was in some way normal. And then at night, there was this sort of dark, fearful night, which was the night of the knock on the door, the Gestapo coming round, the Germans beginning to start imposing their will upon people.
The Reich's propaganda experts installed a ministry in Paris. Literature, film, and radio spewed out Nazi ideology. All opposition press was shut down. Progress about the war and about Vichy government failures were known only by word of mouth. Connections with the political opposition were difficult to make. Food shortages developed. Rationing was imposed. All the while, Germans continued to buy whatever pleased them. With the complicity of the Vichy government, manufacturing sectors were redirected to supply the Nazi war effort. The weight of German demands increased. Rural areas quickly became the object of requisitions. Brave individuals stood up. A 19-year-old boy boldly cut the communication cables at a German airbase. He was caught and immediately executed. The Nazis were quick to make an example of anyone who resisted. In spite of the danger, individuals discreetly began to defy the new authority. Rail workers switched trains onto the wrong track, or they simply changed signs to misdirect engineers. But most people were isolated, paralyzed by fear. Churchill saw the malaise in France. He realized that Great Britain now stood alone against the Nazi aggressor. Not content to leave his country's defense to traditional military forces, he ordered the creation of the Special Operations Executive, the SOE.
Germany had won the war. All over the continent, it was clear that Germany had won the war. At that moment, there were very few resistors in France, and SOE's job was to go and get them started. Its task was to create resistance where it didn't exist and stimulate it where it did.
Their clandestine agents penetrated occupied France to perform acts of sabotage, gather intelligence, and make contacts with potential resistors. It was a long, slow road. In 1940, according to SOE estimates, only one French civilian in 100 was ready to resist. But the SOE was not the only group interested in opposing the Nazis. Outside France, an unknown general had escaped to London. With little resources, he made an appeal over the BBC to the French population not to let the flame of resistance die. Few heard the broadcast. It was not clear what this military man could do from London. His name was Charles de Gaulle. As the population of Paris adjusted to Nazi rule, individuals began to contemplate action. But what could they do? The army was demobilized, the forces of repression were everywhere, and a collaborationist French government was in place. Resistance started informally. While most of the population tried to adapt, others formed small groups. They operated in a vacuum, often without clear objectives. Long-term strategy was non-existent. One of the first groups that formed in Paris was located at the Musée de l'Homme, the Museum of Man. The intellectuals that worked there found the Nazi idea of Aryan superiority repugnant.
They resist as people of culture. They're defending against barbarism, the anti-culture, the culture of the fascist ideology, which is not cultural at all. That's an ersatz culture. It's a devalued, depraved culture.
The staff began to produce anti-Nazi pamphlets and developed networks throughout France. They established safe houses in Spain for escaped soldiers. Their numbers grew, and they made connections with the SOE in London. One of the Musée agents penetrated a submarine base at Saint-Nazaire, built by the German Navy. He found detailed plans of its design, but tragedy struck. The Musée de l'Homme had been infiltrated. The Nazis arrested 15 members. Fortunately, the plans for the submarine base made it to London and the RAF. The British bombed Saint-Nazaire, but not before the execution of the leaders of the Musée de l'Homme network. In Lyon, the largest city in the unoccupied zone, things were different. It was an important rail center and industrial zone that fed the German war machine. But it was not yet fully under Nazi control. It was relatively freer than Paris, with a long history of political activity. People from all over France massed there. Clandestine presses churned out newspapers and journals, hoping to rouse the population to resistance.
They are trying to insist that there is another identity to France, apart from the France which was defeated in the Third Republic. There are German newspapers everywhere, there are collaborationist newspapers everywhere, loads of collaborationist newspapers being churned out. You've got to have some voice against them.
These early resistors often hid in the Traboul in Lyon, an ancient maze-like structure that allowed them to escape detection by disappearing without a trace. Henri Freinet, an ex-military man, was one of the first to realize something had to be done. When the Nazis attacked in May 1940, he was a captain defending the Maginot Line. First trusting Marshal Pétain's call for an armistice, Freinet quickly had second thoughts. He couldn't understand how a great man could capitulate so unconditionally, leaving an empire out of combat. He circulated his doubts in a small paper to his colleagues. He soon developed excellent links with disaffected military men across France. These links proved vital in forming direct action and intelligence groups. Freinet realized the need for arms and made contact with the Americans in Switzerland. He supplied them with information in exchange for support. As his newspaper grew into an important daily publication, so did his organization. Both assumed the name Combat. Across France, workers had traditionally been organized in unions and were known for their militancy. A colorful aristocrat, Emmanuel Dastier, started a simple paper called Libération to appeal to their interests. His paper quickly turned into the foremost democratic workers' organization in France. From their workplaces, Liberation members collected mining explosives, weapons, and intelligence. Another resistance organizer in Lyon was Jean-Pierre Lévy. The young Jewish lawyer and war veteran had read Mein Kampf. For him, Pétain's capitulation in the face of Hitler's demonic designs was unacceptable. He published a call to action entitled Front Terreur, the Irregular. Well established in professional and governmental circles, Lévy brought the middle class into a movement which spread across France. Front Terreur agents developed superb sources of intelligence in the telephone and postal systems. A fascist militia of French thugs, the milice, took notice of these groups. Working with the Gestapo, they arrested, tortured, and killed resistance members. In London, de Gaulle was cut off from the day-to-day struggles inside France, but he was sure of one thing. If the resistance was to be effective, it had to be unified. He charged Jean Moulin with the task. Moulin was already a legendary leader. At the beginning of the war, he was arrested and tortured when, as a government official, he refused to sign a false document. Rather than betray his compatriots, he attempted suicide by slashing his throat with a piece of glass. He later escaped to London and joined de Gaulle. He always wore a scarf to cover the wound. When Moulin returned to France in 1941, de Gaulle was not well liked by the British or the chiefs of French resistance. Moulin convinced them that despite their differing political views, de Gaulle offered the best hope for unity. He was also a source for arms and money. One group was conspicuously absent from the fray, the French Communist Party. They were large and well organized. They understood better than any other group the nature of clandestine struggle. However, the Russo-German Non-Aggression Pact made Germany and Russia uneasy allies. Moscow ordered the French Communist Party to the sidelines. In Paris, many Communist Party members and sympathizers were ready to act with or without the party. Often they were immigrants who were lured to France by the beacon of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Vichy and German authorities had imposed harsh laws on them. They had nowhere to go. One such family was the Eleks. The parents arrived from Hungary with their 2 sons and a daughter. They were determined to make a better life for themselves. They had no illusions about the occupation.
J'étais tout à fait enfant, quoi. Je me souviens qu'il y a un type.
I was still a child. I remember a guy coming to our door to show us a picture.
Il y avait comme ça une voiture.
Several naked men were being run down by an SS Mercedes.
Qui courait.
It was the first time that I felt terror.
La première terreur que j'ai eue.
Without their mother's knowledge, Bella, then 12, and his older brother Thomas began to act.
On fabriquait nous-mêmes des tracts, des papillons.
We started making flyers on our own, and we pasted them up in the street. We almost wet our pants because there was a curfew, and we were not supposed to be out at night. As French, and even more so as Jews.
Comme Français et comme Juifs encore moins.
But things were quickly moving from bad to worse in early 1941. Arrests became more frequent. One of Bella's friends, a German boy of 13, was deported. Then, in an early morning sweep by French police, thousands of Jews and immigrants were arrested. For the young brothers, writing graffiti was not enough. Thomas, now 16, sent his younger brother to the Librairie Rive Gauche, the largest Nazi bookstore in Paris, and told him to draw a map. Today, the building houses a clothing store.
Bon, comme j'étais un petit garçon, je passais.
Since I was a little boy, I was inconspicuous. I carefully studied the place, memorized the layout. Then I left just as I had come in.
At home, Thomas had hollowed out the center of one of his father's books, Das Kapital. He'd constructed a bomb.
The next day, my brother came in and placed the bomb, which he had hidden in the book, right there.
Several moments later, the plate glass window exploded into shards, and the bookstore was engulfed in flame. The Gestapo and the milice arrived. The bombing sent shockwaves through the underground in Paris. The action put collaborators and occupiers on notice. Thomas was recruited into the MOI, the Main Ouvrier Immigré, the immigrant workforce. This group of young foreigners would soon play an important role in the urban resistance. But the resistance was still weak in France. England was still fighting alone. In 1941, Hitler took a step which would have serious consequences for the Reich. His troops stormed across the steppes of Russia, shattering the Russo-German Friendship Pact. The war would now be fought on two fronts, and England had a new ally. In France, the Communist Party, no longer ideologically hindered by a Russian-German agreement, swung into furious action. In Paris on the 19th of August, 1941, on a subway platform, a German naval officer was shot dead. His killing announced the arrival of a new combat organization. The assailant, Colonel Faupien, was a member of the FTP, Front Tireur et Partisan, the military wing of the Communist Party. The FTP moved immediately to join the battle. The armed struggle in the streets began. German soldiers became targets for attacks. But the FTP had joined with the MOI. The war that Paris had escaped in 1940 was now being fought by an army of irregular partisans. German response was swift. 10 Frenchmen, they announced, would be killed for every German killed. The Wehrmacht started with Jews and communists. Léon Landini fought with the MOI.
Nous étions tous absolument convaincus.
We were all absolutely convinced that we were changing the world. It was probably idealistic, but a man without ideals has no future. We had such faith in our ideals that dying for our beliefs seemed a small price to pay.
Ne vaut rien à côté de l'idéal pour lequel il se bat.
In Paris, the FTP and the MOI became among the Nazis' most feared adversaries. After the bookstore action, Thomas Ehrlich quickly rose in the ranks of the MOI. He became a lieutenant in a unit that specialized in train derailments and attacks on German personnel. The FTP and the MOI perfected a system of guerrilla warfare. In groups of 3, they would search out their targets. One would lead and scout, the second would hold up the rear, cover and distract, and the third would attack. For security reasons, the members of the resistance never carried arms on the way to their missions. They would meet at a predetermined spot several minutes before and after an attack. A child or young mother would deliver and pick up weapons. Bela Ehrlich did this many times.
J'avais 12 ans, man. J'avais une boîte à violon, j'en mettais des grenades.
I was 12. I had a violin case, and I would carry grenades, revolvers, automatic rifles. With my short pants and my curly hair, I looked totally innocent. I was a kid. I was never suspected. In fact, when there were roundups, the police told me to get out of the way.
Despite strict security, sections of the MOI would later be infiltrated. Thomas and 20 of his comrades were arrested. A show trial was held.
Il y a eu une propagande, bon, ils ont profité.
There was a big propaganda campaign. They took advantage of the fact that they were Romanians, Hungarians, Italians, Spaniards, and Jews. To say to the public, see, that's the French resistance. Jews and foreigners.
Ils les mettaient.
Cut off from Thomas, Bela and his family went into hiding. They feared for their lives. All over France, posters appeared.
Pour nous, c'était très pénible parce que...
It was horrible. Everyone talked about it everywhere. It was all over the streets.
C'était tout à fait pénible.
It was absolutely horrible.
The German propaganda campaign had the opposite effect. There was an upswell of support for the MOI prisoners. But the Ehlichs understood what the posters meant. 10 days after the trial, Thomas and his comrades were executed. Their deaths disturbed and inspired Frenchmen for years to come. Outside France, Allied forces invaded Algeria on November 8, 1942. It was their strategy to encircle the Nazis in Europe. A few days later, the Nazis marched into the Free Zone. They feared an Allied invasion from the southern coast of France. The Vichy government looked more and more like a puppet regime. In Lyon, the response was immediate. Combat Front Tireur and Libération took in more recruits and went further underground to avoid increased pressure from the Gestapo and milice. Systematic sabotage of factories and power stations increased, as did attacks on the Nazi military. The FDP MOI sent more troops into the region. Landini, an Italian immigrant of 16 whose family was active against Mussolini, went to Lyon. There he joined Carmagnole Liberté, an MOI group made up of immigrants and Jews.
Lorsque je débarquais, j'ai été reçu par mon frère.
When I arrived, I was picked up by my brother and another Italian. The man took me aside and told me, "You know, it's really hard here. Life expectancy is 3 months. We are fighting the police, the Gestapo, the police every day. He said, if you don't feel like you can do it, we'll buy you a ticket back." "What do you mean?" I said. "I'll do my share. You can ask my brother. I'll never let you down."
Je laisserai jamais me part un autre.
He had come to kill. He and his comrades found refuge in solitary rooms away from their friends and family. They waited until the call came.
Une des actions la plus épouvantable de toutes.
One of the worst actions imaginable was to go on city patrol. The stress was unbearable. You were walking on a sidewalk and you saw a man coming towards you. He was German, all right. Still, he was a man. We had such respect for human life. That was our culture. And then you had to kill him. When you were 5 feet away, you'd step aside to face him. Reaching for your gun, you pulled the trigger. We could see a small hole in the stomach. A second shot, third shot, and when he collapsed, we shot him in the head so that he wouldn't suffer.
After killing a German, the resistor would pick up the soldier's identification and weapons, walk away, and disappear into the Traboul. The MOI had no connection with de Gaulle or the SOE. Killing Germans became one of its major sources of arms. The Nazis sent the infamous Klaus Barbie to root out resistance activity in Lyon. He organized mass executions of any group suspected of resistance activity. He was a willing participant in the final solution, sending hundreds of Jewish children to death camps. A sadist among sadists, he became known as the Butcher of Lyon. To protect themselves, the MOI instituted a security system based on groups of 3. Each team was made up like a pyramid. Only one man, the chief, knew the addresses of the 2 below him, but not those above him. That way, if a resistor talked, he could never give information about more than 2 people, and at no time could he reveal information about the hierarchy above. This security system was so effective that the German forces had to use extreme methods of torture to pry information from resistance members. Still, many could not be broken.
I was arrested. I was tortured. I had my skull fractured, my vertebrae crushed. I had my nose broken, my testicles smashed. People tell me, "You didn't talk. You're a hero." I'm not a hero. 52 of my comrades died this way, and they didn't talk either.
If the populace had been indifferent before, it now became impossible to avoid the weight of German repression. Resistance became a fact of life as Nazi occupiers took more and more from the French. By the end of 1942, Hitler's Russian campaign left German armies bleeding. The Russian winter had crushed Napoleon. To survive it, Hitler paid an extraordinarily high price in men and materials. The war machine at home suffered. The Reich needed men to run the factories. It turned to France.
In France, there were a lot of skilled factory workers. French industry was the best in the world, and that is why the Germans were interested in it. They wanted to use our skilled labor to make sophisticated products for the German army, especially planes and heavy armaments.
The puppet Vichy government created the Service Travail Obligatoire, the STO, a forced labor draft. Men would be sent to work in German plants. In spite of the propaganda, it was seen as slavery. The Nazis placed great importance on the forced labor draft. All segments of the resistance called on the population to escape the draft, and many men went into hiding. In Paris, the MOI took a daring action in response.
3 men, a group of 3, as usual, attacked Ritter. He came out of his house ready to get in his car. A man walked up, pulled out a gun, and killed him.
They struck a personal blow against Hitler. MOI assassinated his personal friend and chief of the STO, Julius Ritter. Ritter's state funeral was held at La Madeleine. Hitler demanded to know who had done this deed. He never learned that it was 3 immigrant Jews from the MOI. Occupied France, however, silently applauded these anonymous freedom fighters. Klaus Barbie's treachery came home to roost on June 21, 1943. Using information gleaned from a traitor, he arrested Jean Moulin, de Gaulle's agent, at a secret meeting. He was brutally tortured for 2 weeks and died without revealing who he was or what he knew. His death was a temporary setback for the resistance. But before his arrest, Moulin created the CNR, the National Committee of the Resistance. It united the non-communist organizations in the North and the South. They had all agreed to gather their armed sections into one secret army. Some of this army would come from the countryside. Young men who ran afoul of occupation law often hid in the forests. They were called the maquis, the French word for underbrush. Escaping a prisoner of war camp in Germany, Paul Coutet became one of them.
I escaped, and I went to a French officer who asked me, "What do you want to do now?" I answered, "Get the Nazis out of here. We've seen enough of them, haven't we?"
He was directed into the mountains. There he found German deserters, anti-Franco Spaniards, peasants, students, urban resistors who were no longer safe in the cities, and many young men targeted by the new forced labor law.
The maquis were created from scratch, just like the resistance of 1940 and 41 in the towns had been created from scratch. And it's created from below, from the grassroots. It's not imposed from above.
All over France, rural groups of between 15 and 30 men sprang up. In spontaneous fashion, they began to organize themselves.
Before D-Day, there were only small actions, what we called actions of necessity. When the winter came, we didn't have warm shoes. We learned that the enemy had ordered ski boots for the Russian front. When the boots were ready, we were informed and we raided a wagon that was about to leave.
The maquis were often dirty and without basic necessities. Vichy authorities were quick to brand them as gangsters and thieves. Contact was prohibited, but the peasantry considered them allies. Whenever possible, villagers supplied them with shelter, food, and false papers. In spite of local help, the maquis was poorly armed. They had 1 rifle for every 5 men, 1 automatic rifle for every 100. They were no match for the heavily armed Germans. They resorted to hit-and-run actions that didn't involve direct combat. Eager to become real fighting units, they contacted the Allies to arrange for arms drops.
Before the drop, we got a coded message on the BBC at 1 p.m. The message had to be confirmed at night. When we received confirmation, we ran to the landing field, started lighting fires, and waited.
The British Special Operation Executive, the SOE, became interested in incorporating all French groups into one resistance force.
SOE was anxious to help, but it couldn't do a colossal lot to help. It could provide a little food, fair quantity of clothes and boots, and a substantial quantity of small arms.
In London, the Allies began to plan their D-Day strategy and included the Maquis and the urban movements in their deliberations. Soon they intensified contacts with local resistance groups and multiplied arms drops. The Maquis continued to use guerrilla strategy, vanishing into the woods after each attack.
Nous attaquions les Allemands chaque fois que nous le pouvions.
We attacked the Germans whenever possible, so much so that they didn't dare go out at night. And in the day, they wouldn't go out with less than 10 cars. We didn't mind. The more they were, the more damage we could do.
On leur faisait plus de mal.
The Germans were enraged. They abandoned military rules and randomly killed civilians, sometimes burning down entire villages. But the Maquis were undeterred.
If anything, it reinforces their sense of hatred, their sense of the need for resistance to free these areas from the Germans. It brings the war close to home, very nastily close to home.
Encouraged by their small victories, the Maquis spirit soared. The established resistance tried to bring Maquis groups into their movements. These groups often became affiliated with the national organizations, but almost always maintained their local independence. By 1944, there were Maquis that had the look of regular troops. The Allies considered using them to create liberated zones inside France. The rural fighters who began as a disorganized bunch of outlaws suddenly felt empowered. By spring 1944, liberation fever was in the air. Ahead of Allied orders, the Maquis took initiatives to attack German garrisons. One such attempt happened in the Auvergne. The Maquis seized the plateau of Montmouchet. On May 2nd, 1944, hundreds of men from villages and towns flooded to the region.
In the beginning of May, there were about 2,700 men at Montmouchet. I led 1,650 men myself, and there were about 1,500 hidden in reserve.
Hoping to be the vanguard of the Army for National Liberation, they attacked German positions, inflicting serious casualties.
72 Germans were killed. I'm certain about it because my men took their shoes. We didn't have good shoes. We had wooden shoes, slippers. So they took their shoes. 72 pairs.
The Germans withdrew, only to prepare a counterattack with heavy artillery. In the second round of battle, they reclaimed their positions. But before they could be slaughtered, the Maquis vanished into the woods. Their leaders awaited Allied instructions. On the night of June 5th, 1944, the BBC sent a coded message.
The red message was for the invasion. It said, "What do you think of the sweet apple?" So we intensified the sabotage. The Germans couldn't move anywhere anymore.
On June 6th, Allied forces landed in Normandy. Within days, resistance members sabotaged over 5,000 miles of railroad tracks, slowing the German supply of men and materiel to the front. For the Allies, it was vital assistance, the fruition of long years of planning. In the mountainous Vercors region of southeastern France, thousands of Maquis had massed. Many considered it a mountain fortress. There was rumor of an Allied base on the plateau, a Plan C. Perhaps de Gaulle himself would return to France at the Vercors. The Germans attacked and were beaten back. The Allies dropped machine guns and ammunition. On July 14th, Bastille Day, French Independence Day, more Allied aircraft appeared.
There's a massive parachute drop on the day which comes down in red, white and blue flags, or bleu, blanc, rouge if you're French, and they come down in these flags, and it's a moment of great celebration.
Sure that it was a sign that Plan C would soon be implemented, the Maquis considered the region liberated and declared the Republic of Vercors. The BBC broadcast the news, and the Maquis waited for the Allies on the terrain they'd prepared. Then, over the mountains, gliders appeared. The young troops ran out to meet them.
The young boys who looked up in the sky thought that they were Allied planes. It happened so fast, it only took 12 seconds.
Over 500 SS troops engaged the lightly armed Maquis in battle and swiftly defeated them. They were the spearhead of a German attack supported by 20,000 men. The remaining 3,500 Maquis were slaughtered and the Vercors villages destroyed. As a standing army, they were no match for the Germans. The Allied Plan C planes never existed. In June and July 1944, fierce battles raged in Normandy. As the Allied forces moved forward, the Germans tried to direct resources to the front. Urban and rural resistance groups harassed them at every turn. Hitler ordered his elite combat unit, Das Reich, up from the south. They lost critical days blocked by sabotaged bridges and rail lines. Outside the village of Oradour-sur-Glane, a Maquis attack captured several Germans. One managed to escape, making his way back to Das Reich headquarters. A unit of the division descended on the town.
Life was normal in Oradour. So quiet, in fact, that when the Germans passed through, everybody came out of their house to watch the troops.
Tanks rolled into the village while two German soldiers politely requested that each house be emptied of its inhabitants. They directed over 600 villagers to the main square. There, they separated the women and children from the men. They herded the women and children into the church. The men were pushed into a hay barn. The Nazis set up a machine gun.
Until then, there hadn't been a single gunshot in the village.
Outside, Wagnerian music was blasting.
And then they started firing at us. Comrades collapsed on me, gasping. Then I realized that they really wanted to kill us. I kept thinking, but I'm not dead. I'm not dead.
The Germans inspected the bodies closely and shot those who were still alive.
One of my friends was lying on me. They shot him. The bullet went through his head and penetrated my thigh.
Their thirst for cruelty was not yet satisfied. They covered the pile of corpses with hay and set it on fire. In the church, the women and children met a similar fate. First a grenade, then fire.
When the fire reached me, my arm and hair were burned. I thought I should get out of there, even though I was convinced that I would be shot on the spot.
He was lucky. The Germans had left. Only one woman and 5 men survived the massacre. Robert Hébert escaped to the Maquis. Soon after D-Day, de Gaulle's forces landed from London to take command of the United Resistance. The Maquis were integrated into a national structure called the FFI, the French Forces of the Interior. For the first time since Pétain's armistice, a French general commanded French troops that engaged the Germans on French soil. On August 16, 1944, the Allies launched Operation Anvil, invading the south of France. The Maquis played an important role in the invasion. The Allies had predicted it would take 90 days to reach Grenoble. They arrived in just 1 week. The saboteurs and guerrillas had done their job well. The war was almost over.
Nous avons capturé 22 000 prisonniers.
We seized 22,000 German prisoners. But they wouldn't surrender to us, the Maquis. We had to find an American to sign the papers.
Qui signe la capitulation.
In fact, Germans all over the south were very pleased to surrender. But they always tried to surrender to an Allied soldier because this was part of the kind of rules of war. They wouldn't surrender to guerrillas or freedom fighters of any kind.
In Paris, posters began to appear, telling people to prepare for the liberation. But there was a debate among the resistance itself. Should they wait for the military support of the Allies, or should they risk massacre and rise up themselves? In Warsaw, several weeks earlier, an uprising had been attempted. The German reaction was overwhelming. The city was leveled. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower and the Allies wanted to bypass Paris as they moved toward the Rhine. Ike believed the capital had little military significance and didn't want his troops bogged down in street fighting. But events were getting out of hand. Throughout the summer, there'd been paralyzing strikes and isolated clashes between freedom fighters and Germans all over the capital. On August 19, 1944, the resistance organizations of the Paris police reclaimed their own headquarters across the Seine from Notre Dame. This was the first step toward violent insurrection. Deep in the catacombs, FTP FFI Colonel Roltanguay went to his secret command post. He contacted FTP FFI units around Paris. Fighting broke out all over Paris. The population that had helplessly watched the Germans march into Paris took to the barricades, distributing arms amongst themselves. Fierce battles continued for days. The insurrectionists had spirit, but they lacked the heavy weaponry of the Wehrmacht. Victory was not yet in sight, and great losses were expected. De Gaulle finally persuaded Eisenhower to divert troops to Paris to avoid a bloodbath or perhaps a communist insurrection. On August 25, 1944, the tide of war finally reached Paris. Tardily, the French General Leclerc and his 2nd Armored Division arrived in the capital. Soon, French tanks were in place. The inevitable day had arrived. The Germans surrendered. 20,000 were taken prisoner. 2,500 were killed. In Paris, resistance members tracked down the last Nazis and pro-Nazi French, pursuing them wherever they hid. In the end, the FFI had lost almost 1,000 men. More than 500 civilians were dead, but Paris was free. The Americans had considered setting up a military occupation government, but de Gaulle had managed to forge a unity among all the resistance organizations. He was the head of France. Triumphant, de Gaulle paraded down the Champs-Élysées. The crowd went wild. He was followed by a French army, which gave him legitimacy. It was made up of patriots who had struggled clandestinely against enormous odds. Eisenhower said that the resistance had made a contribution equivalent to 5 divisions of men. It sprang from the land and from defeat and grew among those who shared a vision of France, patriotic and free, the Republican land of liberty, fraternity, and equality. As they neared the Arc de Triomphe, it was the end of a long march, full of humiliation, suffering, and agony. Each step in that long march brought them closer to the dignity and national pride they'd lost in 1940. France was now ready to reclaim her honor. Many troops from many lands fought and died to liberate the land of France. But it was the resistance who liberated her spirit.